when I was around 9. My mom, my little sister, and I lived in this small house on a quiet street. It felt safe most of the time. Neighborhood kids rode bikes in the summer and doors stayed unlocked. My mom liked to say the house was old, and that old houses made noises. That made sense. But some of the things I remember from living there didn't sound like the usual creaks and groans. They sounded wrong in a way I couldn't explain back then, and even now it gives me a bad feeling to think about it. The first thing that scared me happened one night when I couldn't sleep. I lay there with my blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to my ceiling. My room was small. Just a bed, a dresser, and a toy chest by the window. Outside, the trees cast moving shadows on the walls whenever the wind blew. For a while I told myself it was just the branches. Who's the wind? Then I noticed one shadow that didn't move with the others. It sat low in the corner near the toy chest, like something tall and still was crouched there. At first, I figured it was a pile of clothes or a big stuffed animal. I almost laughed at myself for being scared, but the shadow vanished when I blinked. I felt this cold wash through me. Not the room being cold, but that hollow kind of cold that feels like it's inside your chest. I pulled the blanket over my head and tried to sleep, pretending I hadn't seen anything. In the morning, I didn't think about it until I saw the toy chest. It stood open. I always closed it because my mom would get mad if toys spilled out, so seeing it open felt wrong. I closed it myself and kept my mouth shut. A few weeks later, my sister, who was only 5 at the time, told our mom she didn't like the man in the closet. It sounded casual when she said it, like she was telling us she didn't like broccoli, and I froze because of how calmly she said it. Our mom waved it off and told her little kids imagine things, but the look on my sister's face told me she wasn't pretending. She said he stood in the closet at night and whispered, but she couldn't make out the words. Mom tucked her in, said a prayer with her, and never checked the closet. That night I woke up to this dragging noise across the floor, like nails scraping the wood. I was frozen and too scared to move. The sound stopped right beside my bed. I knew if I looked over the edge I would see something looking back. I held the blanket tight and somehow went back to sleep. When morning came, there were long, fresh scratches in the floor next to my bed, like someone had dug into the wood. I ran to show my mom. She got angry and said I had been playing with something sharp or dragged furniture. I swore I hadn't, but she didn't believe me. After that, the nights got worse. I started hearing soft whispers that seemed to come from the closet, like a radio turned down very low. Sometimes I'd hear my sister cry, and when I ran into her room, she'd be pointing at the corner and saying, "He's there, he's there." I never saw him, but I believed her. You know the feeling when you know someone is watching you and the hair on your arm stands up? That's what it felt like. The worst night was in the middle of winter. I woke up and noticed my bedroom door was open, even though I always shut it. The hallway light was on because Mom left one on for us. Then, the hallway light went out as I watched. I thought the bulb had blown, but then I heard footsteps down the hall. They stopped right outside my door. I wanted to call for my mom, but my voice wouldn't work. The door creaked, and a dark shape leaned in, just enough for its head to show in the doorway. I shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep. When I opened them again, the door was closed and I was alone. In the morning, I asked my mom if she had come to my room, and she said no. She'd been asleep all night. My sister said she'd seen the man by her bed too. When we told Mom together, she finally looked worried. That night, she lit a candle and said a prayer in every room. For a little while, things calmed down, but it didn't last. One afternoon, I came home from school before my mom and was on the couch doing homework when I heard the toy chest slam in my room. Nobody else was home. I told myself it was the wind until I walked down the hall and saw my bedroom door wide open. My toy chest was closed, but toys lay scattered across the floor like someone dumped them out. I stood there frozen and waited for my mom to come home. When Sadid laughed it off and blamed the cat. Years later, after we moved out, I asked my mom if she had ever seen anything in that house. She hesitated, then admitted she sometimes woke to a shadow standing in her doorway. She said she hadn't told us because she didn't want to scare us, but she confessed she thought something was wrong with that house. She said she believed it might have been a man who'd lived there before. She didn't say much more, but I know what we saw. Even now, when I think back, my stomach turns. It wasn't just a child's imagination. It felt real and like whatever it was wanted us to know it was there. Sometimes on nights when sleep won't come, I can still hear the sound of nails dragging across the floor in my head. A year later, when I was about 10, we moved into a bigger house. My mom had remarried, and we needed more space. This new place was newer, in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by trees. I thought things would be better here. My bedroom was at the end of the hall, with 2 large windows facing the backyard and a deep closet. The first night in that room, I woke up around midnight because something was moving inside the closet. It was soft at first, like clothes rubbing together. I watched the closet, telling myself the house was settling. That's the kind of thing you tell yourself when you don't want to be afraid. That the sounds are normal. But then the closet door shivered, like someone had lightly pressed it from the inside. It didn't swing open, it just trembled. I wanted to run to my mom's room, but my body wouldn't move. I lay there staring until I fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion. In the morning, the closet was cracked open a little even though I'd shut it. I asked my mom if she'd been in there, and she said no. She suggested maybe the vents or the temperature had moved it, but I knew that wasn't right. After that, the nights got worse. I started hearing tapping on the window at night. At first, I blamed tree branches, but when I looked, there were no branches close enough to touch the glass. The tapping kept going for minutes at a time, and whenever I pulled the blanket over my head, it would stop. I tried ignoring it, until one night I peeked out. There was a pale hand pressed flat against the outside of the window. Our room was on the 2nd floor, so there was no way anyone could have reached it without climbing something. The hand stayed there for a long time, pressed against the glass without moving, then slid down slowly until it disappeared. I didn't sleep that night. When I told my mom, she laughed and told me I might have been half asleep and imagined it. My stepdad laughed too and said I was making it up for attention, but I noticed he kept the hallway light on at night after that, so maybe he wasn't as confident as he acted. A month later, my little brother, he was 4, started talking about the white lady. He said she came into his room and sat on his bed. Mom dismissed it as a toddler's imagination, but one night I heard him screaming. I ran in and found him curled under his blanket crying. When he calmed down, he told me the white lady had been standing at his door staring at him. He said her eyes were all black. I believed him because of the hand at my window and because of the way things had been happening. After that, I slept with a blanket over my head every night, but it didn't stop the dreams. I started dreaming about the white lady too. In the dream, she would stand in the corner of my room and whisper my name. Her voice sounded dry, like dry leaves rubbing together. Sometimes when I woke, I could still hear it faintly, like it lingered in the room. One night I woke and saw her at the foot of my bed. She was huge, taller than anyone I'd ever seen, and her head almost touched the ceiling. She wore a long white dress that moved as if there was wind, even when the air was still. Her hair hung black and stringy and her skin looked chalk white. Her eyes were empty and black, like 2 holes. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I shut my eyes, and when I opened them, she was gone, but the closet door was wide open. After that, I refused to go into my closet. I begged to sleep in my mom's room, but she said I needed to be brave. I don't think she wanted to admit she was scared as well. The scariest night came during a heavy storm. Rain hammered the roof, and the wind howled. I woke to the sound of the window creaking and looked up to see the window slowly sliding open. Even though it was locked, the latch turned by itself, and the window opened all the way. I saw the white lady climb through. She didn't move like a normal person. She floated, her feet never touching the floor. She drifted toward my bed and leaned over me until her face was inches from mine. I felt her breath on my skin, and it was freezing. She whispered my name in that same dry voice, and I finally screamed. My mom and stepdad rushed in, but when they turned on the light, the window was closed and locked, and there was nobody there. They scolded me for freaking everyone out, but I could see worry on their faces. The strange part is, I don't clearly remember everything between the moment she leaned over me and my scream. There's this foggy gap where things feel like they happened in a blur, like my memories lost a few seconds. The best way I can put it is I went kind of blank for a moment, like the world just dropped away. And the next thing I knew, I was screaming while my parents burst into the room. The window was closed again, which made them think it was just a night terror. That's what they decided. I remember my mom taking me to therapy for a while because they were worried. We stayed in that house 3 more years, and I never stopped feeling uneasy. My little brother stopped talking about the white lady after a while, but I think it was because he was too scared to say anything, not because she stopped showing up. Sometimes I'd hear him whispering or crying in the night, telling whatever it was to leave him alone. Maybe he just didn't want to be dragged into therapy. Even now, when it storms late at night, I hesitate to get up for a glass of water or to use the bathroom. I glance at the corners of my room to make sure nothing tall is standing there. Those small fears stick with you. I might have believed it was only night terrors if I had seen that pale hand on the window before my brother ever mentioned the white lady. So, I don't have a neat explanation. Just a weird, freaky memory that won't fully make sense. When I was 8, I rode my bike almost every afternoon after school. I knew that street like the back of my hand. Every crack in the sidewalk, where the mailbox sat, which dogs would bark at you. There was one house down the block I liked to ride past. It had a long driveway and a wide front yard. And most afternoons, an older man would stand by the end of the driveway where it met the sidewalk. He always wore a hat and would stand there watching the street. When Primera wrote Eb, he'd say hello and wave, but he never stepped onto the sidewalk. He never came close. He'd just call out from the driveway and then go back to watching. I always waved back. My mom had told me to never cross the street alone. So I never went across to talk to him face to face, but he somehow learned small things about me. That I had a little brother, that my dad had gotten a new car. Things I had done to told Anyane. I figured he must have seen us from his porch, or noticed us from down the block. One day I got a bright new red bike with a shiny bell. I rode by slow and he called, "Nice bike," and asked if I wanted to race to the corner. I said no, because my mom would get mad. He laughed and told me maybe someday. We kept having short conversations like that. Jokes about a cat, a story about a bird that liked his fence, a rule about not stepping on one stone in his yard. Sometimes he was there and sometimes he wasn't, but I started to look for him when I'd ride past. Then one week he stopped coming out. I rode by and the curtains were closed, the driveway empty. It felt weird not seeing him there. I wanted to ask my mom if I could cross the street and talk to him properly, but she said no, kids shouldn't be out on the road alone. A few days later, I saw a woman in the backyard. I had never seen anyone in that yard before, so I had to ride around the corner to get a better look. She was watering the garden and had her hair pulled back. I stopped my bike down the street so she wouldn't notice me too close. I wanted to call out the way I always did, but I didn't. I don't know if it was shyness, or just the thought of my mom yelling at me for being out too long. The woman didn't seem to notice me. A little later I rode by again, and she was on the back porch with a mug in her hands. She opened a side door and went around the back of the house. I waited where the sidewalk curved, scanning the block to make sure my mom wasn't outside. Then I crossed quickly like I wasn't supposed to. Up close, the house looked bigger, and the driveway sloped down to the street. I felt like I didn't belong there. I stopped by the back gate, and the woman turned, saw a small kid with a red bike, and came to the gate. She asked what I was doing, and I told her about the man who used to stand in the driveway and say hi. I told her he even knew my name and had said he'd race me someday. She wiped her hands on her dress and said he sounded like her husband. I thought she'd say he was inside or would fetch him, but instead she said he'd died the year before. She told me his name was Harold, and that he had died in his chair. I felt this chill open up in my chest. I asked if she had a picture, and she brought a small framed photograph showing a man wearing a hat, smiling. The same kind of smile I'd seen. She said the photo was recent, and that he'd had a scar from his ear to his mouth since he was young. I remembered the man I'd been talking to. He'd had a smooth face, no scar, just a round, plain face. The hat and smile matched, but the scar did not. I mentioned I thought I once saw a mark on his cheek, but figured he'd just rubbed it. She said the scar had been there a long time, but he sometimes hid it under stubble. She kept saying again that her husband had died and that no one else lived there, and that she had come back last summer to look after the garden. She said she'd never seen anyone standing in the driveway. I started to feel scared and thanked her, backing away. I didn't look back at the yard. I rode home slowly and put my bike in the garage, like nothing had happened. The ride back felt strange. The kind of silence that comes after almost getting into an accident, when you drive home with the radio off and your hands tight on the wheel. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about his laugh and how he said my name, and about that scar in the photograph. The next day, the curtains at the house were open and sunlight washed the porch, but the driveway was empty. I waved from the corner and no one waved back. So pre-meta, rode the off. For a while I tried to forget. I found different routes, talked to kids on other blocks, and focused on new things. Weeks went by and nothing happened. Then one night, I woke up and heard my name being called outside my window. It sounded exactly like the way the man used to say it. It called my name slowly over and over. I sat up and my head spun a little. There was a soft rain outside, but I knew I wasn't daydreaming. The voice was clear to me. I yelled for my mom and flung the covers over my head. She came in and sat by the bed and told me it was just the wind. She lifted the blinds to show me there was no one there. My dad checked locks and looked outside with a flashlight. They said there was no one. They told me maybe I had dreamed it, which is the usual thing parents say when a kid is scared. The next morning, my throat hurt from shouting. At school, I told friends, and they laughed and dared me to go stand in that driveway at night and call their names. I didn't take the dare. Time passed, the neighborhood changed, houses sold, and the woman's house sat empty for a while. Movers came at one point, and then new people painted the place. The long driveway stayed the same, but there were new cars in the drive. I rode by and didn't look for a man in a hat anymore. I got older, learned new routes, met new neighbors, and at 18 I moved away for college. My parents sold that house while I was gone, and I never went back. The memory of that man sits in me like a pebble, small but impossible not to feel. Sometimes I wonder why I didn't ask the woman more questions, or ask to see more photos. I was only 8, and I think I was too scared to push. Maybe I should have been braver and asked to see a wedding picture or the scar close-up, to find out if he really had been there or not. But at the time I didn't think like that. Years later, I told the story to a couple of people, and they asked why I had gone back to the house to ask more, or why I had told the woman everything I remembered. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should have been nosier. Maybe I could have gotten some answers. A few years back, I drove down that block out of curiosity. Kid rode his bike near the corner, and for a moment I wanted to stop and ask if anyone ever stood in that driveway and said hi. I wanted to know if anyone else had heard a voice in the rain, or if someone else had felt watched. I wanted a tiny confirmation to close that loose little worry. But I didn't stop. I drove on and left it as it was. The memory stayed in the same place, where I keep it, and I try to push it down. There are things that never go away. Small memories can feel like they have their own weight. The man with the hat, the photograph with a scar, the voice in the rain. None of it lines up neatly, and that's what makes it uncomfortable. Maybe I imagined the man. Maybe he was real and his spirit lingered. Maybe the neighbor mom simply shielded some private grief, and the coincidence was cruel. I can make a list of rational explanations if I try. Kids have active imaginations, sleep paralysis, the mind filling gaps, but there were details I still remember like flashes. The exact tilt of his hat, the timbre of his laugh, the way he said my name. Those little things stick with me. The times when I felt watched on summer afternoons, or when my name echoed in the dark during a rain, or when I stood at the gate talking to a woman who told me her husband had died. That mix of ordinary and strange is what I keep replaying. Understand, I'm not saying any of this was proof of ghosts. I don't have proof. I only have a handful of moments that didn't fit and left questions, and I have the feeling that some things are better left unexplained for a while. Still, sometimes late at night, when the memory comes back, I get that same hollow feeling in my chest I felt when I was a kid. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet and low, like a small stone pressing into my ribs. I don't go back to that street. I don't need to. The memory is enough to remind me that the world can contain little unsettling things that sit at the edge of ordinary life. Each time I tell the story, part of me hopes that someone else will say they saw the same thing, but most of the time, I end up with the same question. Why didn't I push for answers when I had the chance?